Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, hello, hello. I'm so happy to have those of you that are already hopping on this morning here in East Coast time. We are both actually in Florida, Jennifer and I, which is really, really cool. So thank you so much for already hopping on and showing your support to Jennifer and the Her Version community. As you know, Her Version is a platform built on amazing woman, as I said, named Jennifer Silliman. Jennifer is an advocate for women who have or are suffering from postpartum and is a firm believer in creating community around the subject in order to educate more women. She is the creator of Dark Side of the Full Moon, which is both a film and a podcast that delves into the unseen world of maternal mental health in the United States. She is here to share her own story and also give hope to those that are suffering and those that feel the guilt of the past postpartum feelings. We are excited to learn more and are so grateful for the time she is giving us today. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to sit and chat with me and us.
Sure.
We so appreciate the women who come on and understand the mission of what we're trying to do here and just educate others in areas of which we're not so educated in. So thank you.
So true, especially this topic.
Yeah.
This is like a big topic that is still very stigmatized and not talked about. So I appreciate you giving me this platform to be able to educate and spread a little hope to some moms that might be listening, of course.
Yes, 100%. So what I want to do first, if you don't mind, is just kind of get a little bit of your backstory, how you ended up in this arena of, starting a podcast and having a film based around postpartum and, kind of get a little bit of your journey and then kind of go from there. Is that fine?
That's fine.
Awesome.
Yeah. So my journey starts with my pregnancy, which was 2009. So long ago. It's hard to believe I have a soon to be 13-year-old. But yeah, it started actually during my pregnancy. And it's so interesting because when people hear postpartum depression, they assume, right, that it happens postpartum, like after you've had your baby. And mine actually started in my third trimester. I started having a lot of anxiety, panic attacks pretty frequently. And I had something that is called intrusive thoughts, which are really best described as like a horror movie in your brain. So you pretty much think of any awful thing that could happen to you or your newborn, and those images and thoughts kind of just play out in your mind. And usually you become OCD with them. So they're obsessive. And so they kind of play like a broken record in your head constantly. And they're very debilitating. And you can't really control them. When you try to control them, they just get worse. And they're scary. Because they're not talked about. And that was one thing that I remember looking back into the childbirth education classes that I took, that no one talked about this. Postpartum depression was touched on briefly, but there really was no explanation, one, that it could even happen when you're pregnant. And so, when it happened when I was pregnant, I was really concerned, like, what is this? And it's very scary, and I'm having a lot of anxiety. So what I basically thought it was, I had placenta previa, which basically means I can't have a normal birth. I was going to have a cesarean. And so my cesarean section was scheduled. And I just thought maybe I'm having these thoughts because I'm scared of the surgery. I never really had major surgery before. I was trying to think of every reason that this would be happening to me. And to make a very long story short, I suffered for 3 months pregnant. I suffered for 3 months postpartum. Really started to consider taking my life because I was so debilitated, and really just started to think that my daughter and my husband would be better off with me just not being here. And that's when I knew that I wanted to get help, because I didn't want to take my own life, but I wanted the pain to stop, and I wanted the debilitating thoughts to stop. And so I call it my coming out. I came out to my husband like, hey, all these things are happening to me and I don't know what they are. And please just promise me that you're not going to leave me or take my daughter from me. But I'm having really scary thoughts of hurting myself and hurting her. And I don't know what these are. And so luckily I was already under the care of a therapist. Unfortunately, the therapist never asked the right questions. It was also a male, very sweet teddy bear kind of a guy, but just I never trusted him enough to share with him the thoughts that I was having. And so I never did. And finally, when I came out to my husband, he was like, we need to call your doctor on Monday and be honest with him with what's going on. Luckily, there was a psychiatrist in the group where I went in their practice, and I was able to get an emergency psychiatric appointment that same day. And that was the woman who ultimately saved my life, and the reason why I'm here sharing my story with you today. Otherwise, I don't really think I would be. I mean, she got me on the right medication. She explained to me what was going on. I started treatment, and within a few days, the thoughts went away. It was insane that it just like that turned off for me, which doesn't typically happen. So I was very lucky in that sense. And then I continued with medication for 2 years and therapy as well. But it was more for me, the medication. I was able to, really have and develop coping skills with any symptoms that I might have while even being on medication. And I met my co-producer, Maureen, and we made a film about it. And it's so interesting because, the therapist that I was seeing, who was the big teddy bear kind of a guy, specifically told me that I need to be careful with who I shared my story with. And that if I shared it with certain people, I might lose family members, friends, I might not be able to get a job, and things like that. And I thought to myself, see, this is why this happened the way it did, because, coming out of the therapist's mouth was basically this idea that you cannot tell anybody what happened. And so I'm like, well, this is part of the stigma. And my first thought was, I am going to stand on the tallest mountain that I possibly can, and I'm going to shout it so that every single person on this earth can hear my story and know that they can get better. And so my way to do that was, when the opportunity presented itself, was to make a film. I'm like, oh, I'll be able to touch a lot of people with this. So that's how the film came about. And it's just been an amazing ride since then. I mean, that film came out in 2015. So it's been out for some time. And yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible journey. I feel lucky to be able to share my story and ultimately save families, save lives, and be able to give these moms hope and these families hope that they'll get better. That they need to seek out treatment, and you don't have to be scared to do that. And I think that's, moms are really scared to come forward and admit the way that they're feeling. So that's kind of the long story short. But yeah, so many amazing things have happened since then too, and I'm sure we'll get into those. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It's such an incredible feeling to know that I'm making a difference like that. I mean, it's really incredible.
Yeah. What's the difference between why do they call it postpartum if it could happen during pregnancy?
Right. So I think the biggest misconception is postpartum is a time period. It's not an illness. So when people say I have postpartum, just saying it like that really doesn't even make sense because postpartum is just a time period. It's not postpartum is not postpartum depression. Postpartum is just postpartum. And so there is a huge spectrum of illnesses that fall in what we actually should be calling them perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So they call them PMADs. So perinatal is one word that we use to describe pregnancy and postpartum. So the perinatal period is that entire time around a pregnancy and that first year after giving birth. And their mood and anxiety disorders. Most women don't actually suffer from postpartum depression. They suffer with anxiety while they're pregnant. And so when we just call it PPD and we coin that term postpartum depression, it eliminates an entire group of women that are not depressed and they're still pregnant. They haven't had their baby yet. But that's just the way it's talked about in the media, the way that it's even talked about at childbirth education classes. We just say, oh, it's okay. It's just postpartum. But postpartum is not an illness. It's a time period. And I just think that education just hasn't really been taken seriously as far as the terminology, but the terminology is so important. I mean, this is how we explain it to our doctors. It's how education is explained to families who are going to be going, potentially through this. I mean, it's 1 in 3.
Yeah.
It's a pretty high number of people that are going to suffer from something.
Yeah. What would somebody call it then? If they're not, I know you just said it, but can you repeat it? It's not postpartum, it's
a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So the acronym is PMAD, PMAD. So I think it's important if a mom is having anxiety, she should not go. Okay, so if a mom's having anxiety and she's already had her baby, she should not go to her doctor and say she has postpartum depression. You don't. You have postpartum anxiety, right? And that's why women who are pregnant don't seek help because they don't know what to call it. They're like, I know I'm pregnant. I don't have postpartum depression. I haven't had my baby yet. And the association of, oh, well, people think it only happens during postpartum because they feel like it's that hormonal drop that causes all these moods. And so I can't have anything like that while I'm still pregnant, when the truth is you can. And it's not always a hormonal drop. I mean, there are so many other things that can cause a woman to have some sort of mood disorder while she's pregnant or postpartum.
Yeah. And, a little bit about my story, pregnant at 20 and was a sinner. So was completely abandoned from my family and my church, just totally disowned me overnight. So when I had my baby, I dealt with a slew of suicidal thoughts and wanting to kill my baby thoughts. And I choked it up to my fucked up situation.
Right.
So how is there things that decipher the difference like here that you could tell me, or is this just like you have to go see a doctor and just figure it out?
You mean decipher the difference between the different types of?
I mean, what if I wasn't having, like I say, that's my story. I was having postpartum depression. That's what I say. That's what comes out of my mouth.
Right.
But I might have just been going through some freaking heavy depression because of my situation.
Right. Right. And so when we talk about specifically, we can just say postpartum depression because that's what people are most familiar with. There are risk factors before you even give birth of things that could happen. So it could be just the notion that you are going to be shunned by your family and or church, or you have a big move coming up, or you're stressed out because you don't have a job. And so you might financially not be able to support this new baby. it could be an unplanned pregnancy, which is a whole other slew of things, right? That can happen, because I think the assumption is when you walk into a childbirth education class, at least the teacher's going to assume, oh, you want this baby. Well, there could be moms showing up in there that did not want this baby, and this is unplanned. And that in itself can create a whole series of things.
Got it.
What I always tell families is that the label is not that important. I
Okay.
mean, it's what's important is that you are identifying the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And I always get the question, when do I know it's time to get help? When do I know, you know what? I should probably make a doctor's appointment. This isn't just a bad day. Like, this is something. And I always tell moms, the rule of thumb is, if you've had these symptoms for more than 2 weeks and they are interfering with your daily life.
Got it.
So, if you're not, every new mom wakes up has a couple days where she doesn't take a shower, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that happens, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're depressed because you haven't taken a shower. But if after 2 weeks you haven't taken a shower, then there likely is something there. Go see
Okay.
somebody, right?
Okay.
Appetite changes, not getting a lot of sleep. Well, any mom's going to tell you, well, I'm not getting a lot of sleep, right? But if the lack of sleep is also in conjunction with all those other things going on, there might be something there.
Got it.
So.
Thank you for breaking it down that way. I appreciate that. It actually, the way you broke it down, and this has nothing to do with anything, and I may totally regret making this analogy here, but I work in the narcissistic abuse arena. That's my background, my story. And, women come to me all the time. I don't know if he's a narcissist. I don't know. So how do I know if he's a true narcissist? And it's like, girl, it doesn't matter if he's a real narcissist. Like,
Right.
If it's not working,
Exactly.
then you just have to make a decision, like stay or go.
Yep.
So similar here. It's like
Mm-hmm.
postpartum, nope, not postpartum, girl. Like, if it's not jiving, then go see somebody.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Made it a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the term also, I think a lot of women want to know a term because I think a lot of us do Google searches, right?
Yeah,
We're like,
yeah.
boop, 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 like, what is this? A lot of us use Google as our doctor. It's that safe space where we can kind of explore where we want to explore any sort of medical, whatever, online. And so, yeah, I mean, the good news is there are a lot of resources and there is a lot of good information online. So you are able to find things that are super helpful and things, that you can take to your doctor who may not be educated in this arena. And you can say, look, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I think I'm probably going to end up being diagnosed with. How can we treat this? And that's really it. And like you said, the label is not that important. If you're having symptoms, just talk about your symptoms, because any doctor should know how to treat those. They might just not know that label, which can equally be very frustrating, but it's the truth. I mean, there's so many doctors that are not educated, hence why we made the film. I mean, this film really is for medical providers. It's not for a mom to learn about postpartum depression. It is a very triggering film. It is very graphic. And it really is to show the extremes of what can happen if a doctor does not educate or bring up these disorders that can happen. And when a mom suffers in silence and suffers with no education about it, there are consequences. And, that's what we show in our film.
Yeah. Has there been some changes that you've seen in and around your world, that people or facilities or physicians that have seen it?
Yeah, we have. So our film has been screened over 1,000 times, and a lot of universities and medical schools have bought the rights to the film so that they can incorporate it into their education curriculum.
Beautiful.
For doctors that are coming up, right? Nurses, OBGYNs, because, we talk to medical students and they may be, in their 2 years, 3 years of residency, they get one PowerPoint presentation on depression if they're in the OBGYN circle. And that's not enough. I mean, that's just not enough education on this. And so we are seeing screening increasing at OBGYN offices. We're seeing more pediatricians screen at the first well visit, which is typically 3 days after you've given birth. You have to get to that pediatrician. And a lot of doctors are able to identify it in the mom at that appointment. And just in general, just the awareness, the more people are talking about it online, whether it be just, just your everyday mom or celebrities that are coming out and sharing their story and talking about it. I think we still have a long way to go as far as how the media covers it. The media still, like everything, sensationalizes a lot of things. And believe me, I went to school for broadcasting. I worked in news, so I know how that all works. And I know, it's all about viewers and how many people are watching and whatnot. But at the same time, the way that those types of stories are portrayed can really affect the way a mom kind of sees herself if she's going through something like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, slowly things are changing. It's still there's still not a standard of care that's universal when it comes to a mom who's pregnant and showing up at her OBGYN. I mean, every practice does something different. Every state has different regulations. So there still is no real standard of care, and there's not a lot of coordinated care. So for example, we have moms that are suffering with a mental illness before they get pregnant, and their first thought is, gotta stop taking all my medication, which is by far the worst thing you can do. I mean, for anyone who's been on a mental health medication, you have to wean off of it. You can't just stop taking it. And, most psychiatrists would keep the mom on it, even during pregnancy. A lot of these drugs are safe, and it's safer for mommy and baby if she just stays on it and doesn't end up suffering from some sort of mood disorder because she went off her medication. So there's so many different moving parts. But it's not a difficult thing to figure out. If it was up to me, every OBGYN office would have a therapist and psychiatrist in-house. Just in the office.
Yeah.
So that, I'm a big proponent of coordinated care, so that, the OBGYN is talking to the therapist, who, if the mom needs medication, talking to a psychiatrist. And, even with my C-section, I remember going to the hospital and having to coordinate my C-section with the surgical staff. Like, I remember going there. I have a very rare blood disorder, so I had to do all of these things. But I remember going to the hospital pregnant and doing that myself. I'm like, isn't there somebody who can coordinate all this stuff for me? I mean, I pay a lot for health insurance. I feel like that should be part of it. I feel like I shouldn't have to do that. And I found myself doing that. And, it's just, I don't know. It's, we live in a society, especially in the United States, where we are just not big proponents of preemptive care, right? We're more reactive. So we wait till something happens and then we try to figure out how to fix it. We don't try to prevent it from happening in the first place. And there are things that can, be put in place for us to prevent so many moms from suffering in silence with this. And we just don't put, we don't put the money into that piece of it. We try to put the money into the piece where, moms are already, suffering. So let's try and figure it out. And we don't do such a great job at that piece either. So, it's frustrating, but yes. So to get back to your original question, little things are changing. I certainly have seen a big change since the movie came out. But at the same time, the movie is still very, very relevant. It is not outdated, even coming up on its 10-year anniversary in 2025. It's still very relevant.
100%.
Yeah.
What could we do to get more eyes on the film or in the discussion?
So the film is available 2 ways, actually. There is a rental. So it would be like kind of renting something from your streaming service. You can rent it for 24 hours. It's $10 and you can rent it. What mostly happens with universities or communities or a lot of doula practices or midwife practices will get a screening license. It's $150, and they can screen it as many times as they want to. And a lot of them buy it so that they are able to show it to nurses coming on board. They're able to show it to the doctors, the lactation specialists, the pediatricians. So, that's really, it's those medical providers that make the changes in their offices that trickle down to the mom sitting in her OBGYN appointment. But, just moms sitting around and being open about talking about their experience. Because every mom, it's very rare that a birth goes perfectly, that, after giving birth, that whole time period goes perfectly. And I think I'm the friend that when I have a mommy friend who's pregnant, you best believe that this entire conversation is happening, right? I am talking to them like, are you having scary thoughts? Are you having panic attacks? Are you, what's going on? And it's okay if any of those things are going on, because I know where I can send you and I have resources, and all of that. So, we don't always have to talk about the best parts of pregnancy. Yeah. And even motherhood. I mean, it's okay to talk about the real things because they're happening, because we surely don't see them on social media. I mean, luckily social media wasn't a big thing when I was pregnant, even back in 2009. But the images and the dialogue and all of that can be, there's just a lot of things that come at you when you're pregnant. And having an anxiety disorder on top of that, a mood disorder on top of that, is exhausting. And when you think that you're the only one who has suffered from this and that there must possibly be something wrong with you because no other mom must feel this way about being pregnant or about their newborn, it's just not true. I mean, it's just not true. And I did mourn that time period that I suffered. I don't have any pictures of me pregnant, maybe 2. I don't have a lot of newborn pictures of me holding my daughter. And so I do mourn that time that I lost, that I was suffering and didn't get the help. And I think that's typical. I mean, it happens. And then, you have to do what works for you. For me, it was therapy. For me, it was talking to other moms that went through the same thing. There's just a lot of moving pieces, but having that support system is key, whoever that is for you, whether it's, your church, coworkers, friends, family, an online community, whatever it is that you can find, because you'll find them. I mean, they're out there. And the beautiful part is more women are willing to talk about it and share their story. Because I'm just like you, storytelling is like, I'm so passionate about storytelling. I know that it changes lives and it's so important, and it's such an easy thing to do. And it's so therapeutic for the storyteller. I feel like, I go through like some new awakening every time I share my story. So it's important. And that's why I love my podcast, because I have so many moms that reach out to me and they're like, I'm ready, Jen. I'm ready, Jen, to share my story. Can you book me on your podcast? I want to help moms and I need to share it. My family doesn't even know that I suffered, and I want them to hear it. And I have like goosebumps just talking about it. Like, that's it. Like, the more moms that speak out about this, the more we're going to help them. Yeah. And that's where my passion lies. And that's why, there's not a part 2 to our film. Films are really expensive to make and also very time consuming. So the podcast has been an easy way for me, and a free way for me to be able to continue to share the stories that are still happening in communities all over the world, and giving them that platform that they need to process what has happened to them, and at the same time help another mom.
Yeah. Definitely. What do you think are the first 3 steps somebody should take if they feel like there's an issue? Should they go to the doctor right away, or diet?
Yeah.
What would
Yeah,
you say?
that 2-week kind of period. I mean, this is if you're not having severe symptoms, right? So if you're already having thoughts of hurting yourself and all of that, I mean, if you're having intrusive thoughts like that, then you need to go see your doctor. Now, what doctor? And this is such a tough question because OBGYNs are typically not trained in this. Like that's still, they're just not trained. And what we often find is that a woman will call her OB and say, I'm having, most of them don't say intrusive thoughts because that they feel like they're just going to get locked up and DCF is going to be called and forget about it. So they might just say, I'm feeling really sad. I'm really anxious. Typically what you hear is, that's understandable. You just had a baby a week ago. Well, no, I mean, if the mom is suffering, she needs help. So what help are you going to offer her? Sometimes they're like, we'll call in a script of Xanax, take it when you need it, you'll be fine. Well, the problem with an OBGYN or just a primary care physician prescribing medication, even if it is just Xanax, is that there's typically no follow-up. So there's no follow-up of, hey, are you feeling better? Hey, is the Xanax even working? Are you getting worse? I mean, there's just kind of nothing. They don't manage medication like a psychiatrist would. They don't. And sometimes if there's an underlying condition, Xanax and things like that can make it 100 times worse.
Wow.
And then a mom really feels like, oh my gosh, they put me on this. It's not even making me better. I'm never going to get better. And that's when the thoughts just kind of start spiraling out of control. So it's a tough question. I mean, it's a really, really tough question. But if you have a good relationship with your OBGYN, I would call the OB. Oh, I'm so sorry. I would call the OB. Sorry about that. Call the OB and go online. Online, there is a great checklist of basically how you talk to your doctor about how you're feeling. And I would suggest, and just Google how to talk to my doctor about postpartum depression. You'll find it if you Google search that, and take that with you.
Oh, wow.
So you have kind of a script, because also when we're dealing with these things, we forget symptoms that we have. We tend to sugarcoat it a little bit. Sometimes the doctor kind of talks us out of how we were feeling, and that's not fair either. So really just knowing, what you want to say, write it down. What symptoms are you having? And then I always suggest, if you can take somebody with you, to go with someone. So whether that's your partner, whoever, because they'll be able to remember things that likely you won't remember from the appointment, or even contribute things to the appointment that maybe you have left out. Yeah. So always bring somebody. But, your OBGYN is likely going to be your first point of contact. But go prepared.
Yeah. What are the rules as far as that? Because that was one of my biggest issues, was admitting the intrusive thoughts. If somebody does say something like that, are we right in feeling that we could be locked up in a loony bin? Like, how does that even work?
Unfortunately, yes. Okay. I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, here's a good, because a lot of moms would be like, well, how do I know I'm having intrusive thoughts and I'm not having postpartum psychosis? Which most people know the story of Andrea Yates, who, unfortunately drowned her 5 children and had postpartum psychosis. She had auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, the voices telling her to save her children, basically, by taking their life. And so when I was having intrusive thoughts, I was like, oh no, like, is that going to happen? Like, am I going to do these things that I'm thinking about? If you feel bad about them, like I was having them and crying, like hysterically, like I would never hurt a fly. Like, why am I having these thoughts? Like, I'm a very nice, gentle person. If you're feeling bad about them, they're likely intrusive thoughts. And same with suicidal ideation. So you might go to the doctor and be like, I'm having thoughts of hurting myself. Well, typically, or the first the first thing they should ask you is, how are you going to do it? So anyone who's taking a suicide training or a mental health first aid training, which I've taken millions of them, people are so scared to talk about suicide, especially with somebody who they might think is suicidal. But really, that's the best thing you can do, is just ask them flat out, how are you going to do it? And if they think they're going to do it, they will tell you. And if they have a plan, that's serious. And I didn't have a plan. Well, I kind of had a plan, but I couldn't go forward with the plan because logistically I couldn't do it. It's very weird because my whole intrusive thought thing was around sharp objects. So I couldn't use scissors. I couldn't use knives. I couldn't even touch them without feeling like I was going to pass out.
Wow.
And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pull my car in the garage, turn it on, put the windows down, and just fall asleep. Well, we lived in a townhouse with a 1-car garage, but it was filled with stuff. We never parked in it. And thank God, because I think if I could have pulled my car in there, there was maybe a good opportunity that I would have tried to do it.
Wow.
And so, asking that person, and that's what essentially a doctor should ask. But, a lot of doctors' office don't even have a protocol, for someone who comes into their office suicidal. And it doesn't have to be a mom. I mean, it could just be anyone who's, manic depressive and wanting to take their life and make a doctor's appointment. Well, what does that office do? And I have had local doctor offices here call me because they've seen the film and call me and say, I have a mom here who claims that she is thinking about hurting herself. What should I do? And I'm just like, how do you run your office? Like, what is your protocol? You should probably call their emergency contact, which is asked on every single form that you fill out at the doctor's office. Have them come in, and then likely you should either call 211, which is crisis intervention in most places, or 911 if it's an emergency. And then you cross your fingers and you hope that the staff in the emergency room knows how to take care of this mom. That's still a piece that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting having this conversation because it helps, but then it still kind of like doesn't help because it's like you're still stuck. Like I think of myself back then and all of those insane thoughts I was having, but you do kind of have to go in and sugarcoat it if you do go in. Because I was fine, like nothing happened, but like, how do you know that? So it's like, which one do you choose? Because what if it really isn't fine? And then we're like, don't tell them because you're going to go in the loony bin. But what if you really need to go in the loony bin?
Right. What if you need inpatient
treatment? Like help, go get help, like real help. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
No. It's
but then my situation, I somehow made it out fine. I just did a Facebook post a few weeks ago. My son just turned 18. And the first 2 lines were, my son just turned 18. And I don't know how we got here. Like, we should both be dead. And it was a whole post basically surrounding around postpartum and how, like, I don't even know how I did this. I don't even know how I didn't kill myself or kill my child because the thoughts were so strong. So this is tough. This is really tough. And I guess the only answer is having podcasts like this, which you're running a podcast. Can you talk about your podcast?
Yeah, sure. So the podcast is the same name as the film, Dark Side of the Full Moon. And I do have a lot of moms that come on and share their stories. I also have physicians that come on and kind of talk about the piece that we just talked about. Wow. But again, I mean, these physicians that are trained in this are found in pockets. It's not a mandatory training. It's not a training that everybody gets. More and more practitioners are finally getting into that maternal mental health kind of world and understanding that mental health is a huge part of being pregnant and during the postpartum period. So the podcast, if we're talking about something that could be triggering, there's always a trigger warning before the episode. But it's important for families and moms to kind of know what can happen. I didn't even know this could happen. Like, I had no idea. And I had like every risk factor for it to happen, which it makes complete sense that it did. And I think it's important for women to kind of know their risk factors. Do you have a lot of stuff going on in your life right now? I mean, I really don't know anyone that doesn't. So I think we all probably have that risk factor going into it, right? Are you having a C-section instead of a C-section is a huge risk factor for a mood and anxiety disorder. Do you have a history of mental illness in your family, even if you're not the one who's diagnosed? Do you suffer yourself? That's a huge risk factor. Do you have a support system? Do you have a partner? Are you a single mom who's going home after you have this baby and you're the sole provider? You are it financially, emotionally, physically, to keep this child alive. It is all on your shoulders. Those are things that need to be addressed, I think, even by a doctor when a mom is in an office, to kind of know her whole kind of situation. And I think, and every mom will probably tell you this, it's all about the baby. It is like, we're here as the vessel, but it's mainly about the health of the baby, especially once baby's out. It's like, if mom lived during the birth, everything's fine. It's just like, no, it's not. Like, that's not okay.
Wow.
And so you'll hear all kinds of stories on the podcast, everything from birth trauma, which is huge. Trauma is a huge thing that's finally starting to be addressed in many different circles. But trauma and, having a birth plans are such a big thing. And I think it's a great idea, but when birth plans don't go as planned, it's a huge risk factor for a mom to fall into a deep depression, thinking she failed her child because she couldn't even stick to the plan.
Wow.
Breastfeeding issues, I can't breastfeed. I must be a terrible mom. I can't feed my baby. What's wrong with me? And so these are the kinds of things that when they're presented in a childbirth class, they should be presented in a way that doesn't force one sort of decision as the good one and then the one that's the bad one. Because when we start doing that, if everything doesn't work out perfectly for this mom, she's automatically going to think this is the bad one. And now what, maybe I shouldn't have been a mom, or whatever the case may be. So it's just so important for moms to just have that open mind, be flexible, and educate yourself as much as you possibly can, especially about mood disorders. And one of the great ways to do that is just to listen to other stories of moms, textbooks and childbirth books and what to expect when expecting. I mean, those books are great. But talk to other moms, listen to their stories, especially to your friends that you trust, who are likely not going to sugarcoat anything, hopefully, and kind of tell you the real deal. And it's not about scaring people. It's about preparing people. And when you prepare somebody for something that might happen, they can handle it a lot better. Yeah. And that's really what it's all about. And that's kind of what the podcast does.
Yeah. So it's called, I wrote it down here. Is this right? Dark Side
of the Full Moon.
Of the Full Moon.
Yeah. Dark Side.
And then can they, Dark Side of, I know it's on your website, right?
Yes.
They can just go to your website. Mm-hmm. So Jennifer's website is right above her face area.
Yep. JenniferSilliman.com. I have 2 podcasts. So yes, the link to Dark Side of the Full Moon is on there.
That's awesome. I love what you are doing. It's fantastic. I do want to ask, just in life, in general, what is one of the biggest challenges that you've gone through? Is this one of the biggest challenges, or is there other?
There is one other challenge, and that is coincided with going off my medication, and my daughter got diagnosed with autism right at the same time.
Wow.
So it was like a collision in 2011. That was just like, are you kidding me? I just got through this whole thing with myself, educating myself on mood and anxiety disorders, like trying to figure that all out. And then our daughter Allison got diagnosed with autism, which was something I didn't know about. Right. I mean, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that meant. And so my husband and I went on a journey of reading every book we could and talking to people that were, going through the same thing. And, so I dedicate myself equally between those kind of two causes. Really, kind of just taking care of myself and supporting myself more so than being an advocate. I mean, I'm an advocate for, special needs families, but for me, I'm kind of on the other side of it where I need the support and I need the education on what this is and what this means for our family. I think that, that was a big thing for us, was that my vision going back to motherhood is now completely different. She'll always live with us. She won't be independent. What does that look like for me and my husband? What does that look like financially? What does that look like? And all those typical things that you think about as a mom, especially a mom of a girl, those things are likely not going to happen. And so mourning that was a whole other piece as well, because it was just, it's just a tough thing. But
How old was she when she got diagnosed?
She was 2.
Wow.
Yeah, it was early. I knew something wasn't right. My pediatrician tried to talk me out of it, but I knew something wasn't right. And so she got her official diagnosis when she was about 2.5, but we started treatments at 2. And
aren't girls usually not found to be autistic until way later?
That's so interesting that you say that, because that's not true. Okay. And it's not true because the tests that speech therapists and child psychologists use are geared towards boys. And so what they think is happening is that girls are being screened, but they're falling through the cracks because the screen just isn't geared towards females. So, and the screen is standard for like every child. So it's just like, so they think a lot of girls are just missed, like they're not being diagnosed. And that's, I think, still happening today. I mean, my daughter's only 2 girls in my daughter's class. And I think out of the entire school, there's probably only like maybe 20 out of 100 or 300 students. So her psychiatrist, my daughter's psychologist, actually was the one who shared that information with me. She goes, I really don't think it's a matter of boys are more prevalent. That's more prevalent in boys. It's that the girls are just not being screened properly. So it's interesting, but she's a wonderful girl. I mean, she's just amazing. She's an amazing child. And had she not been diagnosed with autism, by the way, the film would have never been made, because my co-producer, and this is all in the film, so if anyone watches it, how we met, my co-producer, Maureen, who I met for the very first time, came to my house to film my daughter for an autism training video. And that's how we met. She turned the camera on me and was like, hey, tell me a little about yourself, being a mom, to a special needs child, and blah, 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 blah. And so I did. And she's like, oh, you're so good on camera. And I said, oh, well, I went to school for broadcasting. I've done television stuff before. I love being in front of the camera and public speaking and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I run support groups for moms who have suffered with a mood and anxiety disorder. And she's like, oh my gosh, I suffered while I was pregnant and I've always wanted to make a film. And literally the next week she was at my house and we had totally timelined and storyboarded the entire film. And that's how it happened. So it was serendipitous, right? I mean,
wow.
It's really incredible.
I mean, that is such a story of being open. You know, like when you're talking about your stuff and sharing your story, these are the things that come together so easily. I love that. People don't necessarily realize that.
I share my story with everybody. I should just carry a billboard around, but I do, because you never know. And this has happened to me many a times. I mean, where I have said something it happened actually at a hotel bar in Washington, D.C. I was on a conference for my job at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. And it had been a really long day. And I went to the bar, and there was an older woman sitting beside me. And we just got to chatting. And I don't know how we got on the topic. I find any way to really talk about it. And I was like, oh, I did a documentary film about postpartum depression. And she looked at me and she's like, my daughter just had a baby 2 weeks ago. That's why I'm here visiting her. And I know something's not right. And so she's like, how should I talk to my daughter? And so I gave her the whole thing. She went the next day to visit with her daughter. And it turned out her daughter was suffering, and no one had ever asked her if she was having scary thoughts or not sleeping well or anything. Her daughter was just putting on a pretty face, which we're very good at, right? And just pretending that everything is great. And her mom just knew something wasn't right. And the next day I met her again at the bar, and she told me the whole thing. She's like, this is like some sort of, she called them God winks, right? This happened for a reason. And I was supposed to be at this bar sitting beside you. So I would have that, open up that conversation with my daughter. So yeah, I share it in hotel bars, like everywhere it just comes up. Because you never know who's sitting beside you and who needs to hear it. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So besides the podcast, can you let us know what else you do for business?
So I work for Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies in Palm Beach County. I run their Teen Mom Mentoring program. It's a great program we have here for teens in high school who are pregnant or parenting, and we connect them with a mentor. And our outcome is that we want them to graduate with a diploma. So that's really the bare minimum of it. There's so much more obviously that goes into it, but our mentors are, just working women or retired women who've had a child and want to give back. And it's a really unique and just really neat thing to see, especially when they walk. We're getting ready. Graduation's coming up in May, and we have 13 girls graduating out of our program. Most of the others are moving on to the next grade level. So, it's incredible to see the relationships that the girls make with each other as well. They're just so supportive of one another. It's hard being a teen parent. It's hard being a teen. So, being a parent on top of that and being in school, and there's just a lot of things too. But the mentors, that's why we connect them, because they need that extra support.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you do. It's all in the realm.
That's what I do to make a paycheck. Because the podcast doesn't bring in a lot of income. None, actually, to be exact. But I like it. And I started another podcast recently called Hearts of Stars, where I interview a lot of celebrities and talk to them about, things that are near and dear to their heart. I'm actually interviewing 2 actresses tomorrow, one of which did suffer with postpartum anxiety. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, so it's just all about storytelling with me. I love it. I love interviewing people, and it has been a joy today sitting on the other side and being able to share my story. So I appreciate that very much, Sabrina.
Definitely, 100%. I want to ask before we close up, what does success mean to you?
I think success to me means in whatever situation you are faced with, that you do it with authenticity, and that you're authentic to yourself and your beliefs, but also very open-minded. And I think, I've gotten to a point where I'm never done learning. I'm in a constant state of just learning as much as I can about everything. I mean, it's just the growth, right? Success is continuing to grow, and not just kind of settling where you are and knowing that you don't know everything, right? And there's just so much to learn. But yeah, being authentic and just continuing to grow, I think is a good recipe to be successful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So true. Well, I so appreciate you being here. This was very insightful on many levels for me. So I appreciate that. And it kind of just lightened up a little bit of the guilt, because I've been sharing my story since my son turned 17, I never said anything about any of those feelings until that his dad and I aren't together, the whole court system and all that nervousness. And I promised myself that as soon as my son turned 17, I would just let it rip. So I've been sharing my story, but with that, there's some heaviness because a lot of stuff comes back up. And sometimes I re-trigger myself with, the guilt that went along with, and I see us now and the relationship we have now. And I'm like, how could I have ever thought those things? But, realizing as you and I are both on the same wavelength with that, it's so important to share those things in order to, shed light on it for other individuals who are dealing with the same thing. Like, it's almost like our obligation. We're like obligated to do that. And I love that you're on the same wavelength as this platform here with her version. And I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I love what you're doing. I mean, it's fantastic. I love it. I love being in the presence of other women that are just all very passionate about storytelling and just supporting women. That's what it's all about.
100%. Any closing thoughts before I close up?
Just to when it comes to moms, if you're a mom listening, and a mom who's pregnant or just has had a newborn or just another mom, just be honest about your thoughts about the challenges of motherhood, and that because there are challenges and because you might think a certain thing doesn't make you a bad mom, it makes you human, and that's okay. Like it's okay.
Yes. Is your social media on your website? People want to get contact?
It is.
Okay, very cool. So anyone who resonated, we still have quite a few of you hanging out here, going up to an hour. So I so appreciate you being here, supporting us. Jennifer's story and the Her Version platform. Anyone who does resonate with her story wants to contact her. Her website, along with the 2 podcasts that she runs, and her social media is on there. I want to thank you, Jennifer, for taking some time out of your day to hang out with us. For those of you watching on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay wherever you are so we know that you were here and you were listening, and we can send you some love. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you follow, like, and share. If you have an amazing story to share of a struggle to a triumph, make sure you reach out to me or at herversion.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others. Until next time.